Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Conservation in the Classroom, where you get to hear from one of WWF's very own experts. My name's Kate, and I will be your host. And today we are very excited to be joined by Daniel Riley, who works on the climate team here at WWF. Today, Daniel is joining us to share a little bit more about what exactly causes climate change, the impacts that it's having, and what we can do every day to make some cleaner choices that are better for our environment. So Daniel, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Glad you're here.
So before I kick things over to Daniel, I want to just take a few minutes to remind those of you that are watching from the webpage to submit any questions that you have during Daniel's presentation through the Google form that you see under the video box on your screen there. You do not have to wait until the presentation's over to submit your questions. You can do so at any time, and we will try to get to as many of those questions as we can at the conclusion of his presentation. Next, I'd like to take a couple minutes to introduce our three very special guests that we have joining us on camera today. So as I introduce you, just remember to unmute your microphone and say hi. So first up, joining us from her home in Cleveland, Ohio, we have Mina. Hi, Mina.
Hi.
We're glad you're here. Next up from Peoria Hebrew Day School in Peoria, Illinois, we have Mrs. B's class.
Hi.
They're excited. And last but not least, Miss Jones, I hope you can see and hear us okay. If you can, go ahead, unmute yourself and say hi. We have Miss Jones's sixth graders from Guilford Prep in Jamestown, North Carolina. Are you there? No, maybe working on some technical difficulties. Hopefully we'll get her back online here shortly. So without further ado, Daniel, if you're ready, the floor is yours. You can go ahead, share your screen and take it from here.
Great, thanks. All right, let me go to full screen. Okay, can you see it okay? Great. Well, hi, everybody. As Kate mentioned, I'm Dan Riley, and I work at WWF at our main headquarters in Washington, D.C. I'm part of our team that works on climate change and renewable energy, and that will be our topic today for about the next 45 minutes. As I was preparing to talk to you guys today, I was trying to think back on what I knew about climate change or renewable energy when I was your age, and I'm 44 now, and when I think back, the answer is I didn't know anything about it. Neither did my parents. No one I knew thought about anything about climate change or renewable energy. We just didn't know about it. Now, in 2021, we know a lot about climate change. And that's because people all over the world, unfortunately, are beginning to feel the impacts of climate change. Those are its consequences or its impacts. And these impacts are very severe, dangerous, and expensive. And worst of all, they're happening more frequently. You've probably seen the impacts on the news, and many of you, if not most, have felt these effects directly in your life at some point. So what impacts am I talking about? Well, forest fires. Last year, we all saw the videos of the fires burning throughout California, the immense bushfires over in Australia. There's also more storms and stronger storms. We see this on the news all the time, right? Where we are generally experiencing more and stronger hurricanes, more and stronger tornadoes, more severe heat waves, and even strange patterns in winter like we saw in Texas just last month. Coastal and beach erosion, rising sea levels, and more frequent and intense storm surges. Those are the giant dangerous waves caused by the big storms coming in from sea. Those are causing more coastline erosion, resulting in damage to homes and coastal communities. We see severe flooding, increasing rainfall, and the big storms are bringing more water than the environment can absorb. We're also seeing drought. A drought is a long period of time with little or no rainfall. More periods of drought are leading to water shortages. This makes it hard for farmers to grow food. Scientists have noticed a clear trend, which you might have just noticed too, which is places that are rainy are getting more rainy. Places that are dry are getting really, really dry. Climate change is also affecting ecosystems and causing habitat loss. An ecosystem is a community, just like the town you live in. It's the interactions of all the organisms, the plants and animals, and the physical environment around them. For any particular animal, that place is its habitat where it lives. Climate change is damaging ecosystems and causing habitats to change much faster than the animals who live there, like these hungry polar bears in the picture, can adapt or adjust to. The good news is that we know what's causing climate change, or what's driving climate change. Scientists have figured out what's happening, what's driving all the impacts we just talked about. And the answer is human behavior. Specifically, humans are doing things that rapidly release carbon in the form of greenhouse gases into the air. These gases collect in the atmosphere and trap heat from the sun, causing temperatures around the world to rise. Just like how a greenhouse holds warmth to grow plants. You can also think of it like when you return to your car in a parking lot on a warm day. The car gets so hot inside, right? We've all experienced this. It's even more hot than the air outside because the heat is being trapped inside and it gets warmer and warmer. This is called the greenhouse effect. So we call the gases that cause it greenhouse gases. The main ones to remember are methane and carbon dioxide. So what are we doing to cause this? What are we humans doing to cause this? We'll touch on three things. First is agriculture and farming. Animals, particularly livestock like sheep and cattle, produce lots of methane. When livestock are grazed in huge numbers like they are today, in our world, the amount of methane produced is a big contributor. Second is deforestation. Trees hold a lot of carbon inside them. You may remember from science class that plants take carbon dioxide out of the air and put oxygen, that's what we breathe, into the air. Humans cut down trees and clear forests for farming, or to build towns and cities, highways, to build furniture. And when those trees are removed, the carbon they hold inside is eventually released back into the atmosphere. And if those areas are burned, the carbon gets released all at once. Third, the thing we do that contributes the most to climate change is burn fossil fuels. By fossil fuels, we mean coal, oil, or gas. These are naturally occurring fuels that can generate a lot of energy, but they are extremely high in carbon. When we burn them, the carbon is released back into the atmosphere. This is also a good time to mention that fossil fuels also cause lots of other problems, including environmental ones, like this recent oil spill in Spain. Fossil fuels are also bad for people's health. Separate from the greenhouse gases, they produce smoke, soot, and dusty particles causing air pollution. According to a very recent study by Harvard University and others, that bad air is responsible for almost 1 in 5 deaths globally. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting to the topic. Next, we'll go a little deeper into the relationship between energy production and fossil fuels. Fossil fuels can produce a lot of energy for many different purposes. So over the past 100+ years, we've designed all of the things in our lives that require a lot of energy around the burning of fossil fuels. We didn't realize for a long time that this was causing climate change, and many people still have still been slow to embrace that fact. And I can understand that. Greenhouse gases themselves are invisible, and the greenhouse effect didn't cause climate change overnight. But now we have the science community telling us clearly and directly we must do something, and we ourselves are seeing, and in many cases, experiencing directly the impacts. It's a lot to figure out, and it's a lot to think about. Some of the most important systems in our society, key things that keep us going, like electricity, transportation, industry, how we build things, these all have fossil fuels right at the center. And these are three that are responsible for about 3/4 of the climate problem together. Let's look a little closer. First, transportation. This sector generates the largest share of greenhouse gases in the US, primarily from burning gasoline, diesel fuel and natural gas for our cars, trucks, ships, trains, and planes. There's a growing trend, however, to move towards electric cars, buses, and even boats. Electric vehicles have a battery that is charged using electricity. This is an important trend that we'll follow up on in a few moments. Second is industry. Carbon pollution from industry comes primarily from burning fossil fuels to make heat. This heat is used to make many of the things we use in everyday lives, like steel, concrete, paper, even chemicals and medicine. There's a growing trend here, however, to start using electricity for these processes wherever possible. This also is an important trend, and we'll follow up in a few moments. Third is electricity. Fossil fuels are the largest source of energy for making electricity. And you guys know we use electricity for so much in our lives. We use it to keep the lights on, to keep our food cold in refrigerators, to run computers and video games. Yes, let me say that again. We need electricity for PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, Xbox Series S, our Nintendo Switches, and even our Switch Lite. That's not even to mention the internet. So electricity is pretty important. It's a pretty big deal. Now that we know what climate change is and we know what's causing it, that means we know how to beat it. And now you know that one of the most important things we can do to do that is to stop burning fossil fuels for electricity. So now it's vocabulary time, and I'm sure that's just what you guys wanted to hear. But we're going to go over some key words in the next few minutes that'll be important to understand what we need to do. To stop putting carbon into the atmosphere when making electricity, we need to do a couple things. And when we talk about all of them together, we use the fancy word energy transition. You've probably heard the word transition before, right? It means to change from one thing to another, from a caterpillar to a butterfly. That's a transition. We need to change our energy system from old, dirty fossil fuel to something newer, something cleaner. So what are we going to do? First, we need more energy efficiency. Efficiency means to do more with less. In the case of energy, we must get a lot more use out of the electricity we make. When I was your age, light bulbs, for example, produced heat, but they all produced light, but they also produced heat. We didn't need that heat. It was waste. It was unwanted. In fact, it was dangerous. Until someone figured out a new kind of light bulb called LED. That only makes light. LEDs use electricity more efficiently because they're not wasting energy producing the heat that we don't need. We need to find more examples of that. Second, we need lots more renewable energy. Renewable energy is made from resources that are naturally replenished or replaced, so they don't run out. They don't ever get used up. Things like sunshine, wind, waves, and ocean tides, even heat from deep inside the earth. Renewable energy is also called clean energy or green power because it doesn't pollute the air or the water, and it doesn't produce carbon. Third, we need to electrify transport and industry. Remember when I mentioned a few important trends? This is where those connect. Electrify or electrification means to take something that doesn't run on electricity and change it so it now runs on electricity. When we put a battery into a car, we can charge the battery using electricity just like we do, or just like you use to charge your laptop at school. The important part is that when we use renewable energy to make the electricity, then we've removed the carbon from this completely. Fourth, we need more distributed energy. Distributed energy is a fancy way of saying, means that we need to produce electricity in smaller amounts closer to where you're actually going to use it, because distributed means spread out. In this case, it means instead of having one big power plant, the energy, or at least some of it, is made right there in the places where you need it. And a very common example of this is putting solar panels on your rooftop. Finally, we need to figure out energy storage. Energy storage means being able to hold lots of energy until you need it, like big batteries. This will be important because renewable energy can produce the energy we need, but not always when we need it. Solar doesn't work at night, right? And sometimes the wind stops blowing. So we need a way to capture the energy when the sun is out and the wind is blowing and use it later when they're not. So that was a lot of fancy words. Energy transition, a change from fossil fuels. Energy efficiency, more with less. Electrify, make more stuff run on electricity. Distributed energy, spreading it all out where it's needed. And energy storage, holding it until it's needed. So good news, you passed your vocab test, and you now know what we need to do to replace fossil fuels. Now we're going to get to know, go a little deeper and get to know the four most common renewable energy technologies in the US. First is solar, and this comes in two types, two varieties. The first is photovoltaic solar, another vocabulary word. Let's just call it solar PV. Better still, just think of this as the solar panels you've probably seen a million times on your neighbor's roof, or lined up in long rows when you're driving down the road, or even the tiny one on your solar-powered calculator. Solar PV, solar panels, are cool because they convert or change sunlight directly into electricity. That's why they're a great choice for distributed energy. And that's why you see them on rooftops. But you really don't need anything else to have power. But they can also be grouped together in huge numbers to send large amounts of electricity wherever it needs to go. Next is solar thermal. This is a little bit different from PV. It uses sunlight to create heat, and that's what thermal means, heat. For solar thermal, you put a whole bunch of mirrors in a sunny place and tilt them to reflect sunlight at a single spot. That spot becomes superheated. This heat is used to create electricity in a way that is similar to how fossil fuels do it, but without all the pollution and greenhouse gases. It can also be used for some industrial heat needs, so for some of that industry problem, and is a promising energy storage solution. Third, wind power. My guess is that at some point you have all seen giant white windmills like this out on the horizon. Wind power produces more electricity in the US than any other renewable source. Wind power uses the wind to spin those giant windmill blades around. Inside the windmill, that turns an electric generator, which produces the electricity. The fourth renewable technology is geothermal energy. Geothermal is a really cool source that's used in some parts of the US, but not at a very large scale yet. The way it works is that wells or holes are drilled 1 or 2 miles deep into the earth until they reach superheated water or rock or even air. Like with solar thermal, the heat can then be used to create electricity, but without all the pollution, and again, without the greenhouse gases. All right, let's talk about what WWF are doing and what you can do to help. WWF's overall approach is simple. We bring people together who can be more effective if they work cooperatively. We bring expert knowledge, insights, and science into key decision-making. We try to support those that will drive the energy transition, like governments, like large companies, and like local organizations and groups that are taking action. I'll briefly take you through some of the work we do, just so you can get an idea. First up, it's called the Alliances for Climate Action. An alliance is a group of people working together. These alliances all over the world are made up of different groups, all trying to beat climate change, including cities and towns, maybe yours is part of it, states, colleges and universities, hospital systems, religious organizations, and companies. These groups hope that by working together, they can get more done. Next is the Science Based Targets Initiative, which is a lot to say. So let's call it SBTI. This one is about working with big companies to help them figure out how much and how quickly they need to reduce their greenhouse gases in order to prevent the worst effects of climate change. Once they know that, they can set a goal or a target, and they can get to work. SBTI has worked with over 1,200 companies to do this. To help them meet their targets, we've developed the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, another group working together to be more effective. We call it REBA, and REBA focuses on helping companies figure out how to buy and use renewable electricity to run their business, to make the products that we buy. Some of the biggest companies in the world are involved, like Amazon, General Motors, Google, Walmart, and Disney. And we also have similar programs in Australia, China, Mexico, India, South Korea, and Vietnam. Like REBA, the Renewable Thermal Collaborative, the RTC, focuses on bringing companies together, but for the industry part, helping companies figure out how to stop burning fossil fuels for heat and to electrify or to replace it with renewable energy. RTC works with big industrial companies too, like Procter & Gamble and Mars, which you may have heard of. But we also work with cool companies that are designing the new renewable technologies that those companies need to use. Lastly, we work a lot on aviation. And aviation is a fancy word for airplanes and air travel. WWF does a lot of work pushing the airlines to do more to reduce their greenhouse gases. It's a difficult challenge. More people and more of our stuff travel by air all the time. We haven't really figured out how to electrify planes yet, so we have to keep working together to find a way. Before we open it up for questions from you guys, I wanted to leave you with a few thoughts on what you can do. And my answer is really simple. Keep doing what you're doing here today. And what I mean is, keep learning about climate change. Keep learning about renewable energy. Talk to your parents about it. Talk to your teachers about it. Ask your community leaders what they're doing and ask how you can get involved. And one way for you all to get involved is by checking out a really cool program WWF has called Earth Hour. And it's just in time because it's happening this Saturday. So pay close attention. Earth Hour is a single hour every year during which participants in cities and towns all over the world show our commitment to protecting nature. This year for Earth Hour, WWF will be helping people meditate or reflect or think about how we can rediscover our wonder for the natural world and our gratitude for all it provides. And this is also an opportunity to reflect on our commitment to saving the planet. It's a great thing to participate in. It's really exciting to feel connected to so many people all over the world at the same time. Check out the link there for more information. And now I'll hand things back over to you, Kate.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. We are going to get started with the question and answer part of the program now. So just a quick reminder to those of you that are watching from the webpage, be sure to place your questions in the form, and to our special guests on camera, just make sure to have those questions ready and remember to unmute yourself when it's your turn. So we're going to start with a couple that were submitted online, and then we'll turn things to those of you on camera here. So the first question we have is from Tristan in Maine, who wants to know, how could you get the mayor in your town to install solar panels or wind turbines on the businesses there?
That's a great question. And I think the way that we've done a lot of the work and how we approach it with WWF is we start two conversations. So one of those conversations is to talk to the mayor and see what he can do or she can do to try to talk to the companies or influence that, or what the planning is and for the town. But the other way is to talk to the businesses themselves. They'll ultimately be responsible for the ones who have to choose whether they want to put the solar panels on their roof. And one of the ways one of the reasons companies are choosing to do this, either with solar panels or even buying lot of renewables, is that it's becoming cheaper. It's cheaper than buying energy that's generated with fossil fuels. Because if you think about it, when you have the sun or the wind driving your energy, that's free. When you have oil or gas or coal, that's something that you constantly have to buy in order to add it to the process. And so it gets more expensive. And we're reaching a point right now where we've figured out how to do the free stuff, how to take advantage of the free stuff so that renewable costs are coming way down. So if you put solar panels on your business, you're going to save money. So that's one way, talk to the business as well as talking to the mayor.
Okay, that was a great first question to kick things off. Our next question is a good one too. From Lorian and Brighton in Georgia. They're curious to know if it's true that cow farts contribute to climate change. And if that's true, if you can explain it.
So the fancy word that we learned earlier for cow farts is methane. And so when you have cattle and sheep and all of those animals that are grazing constantly in huge herds, just like every other animal, sometimes that gas comes out the other end and it goes up into the atmosphere. And because we eat lots and lots of meat and we drink lots and lots of milk all over the world, we have huge herds. And so all of that eating and all of that other stuff starts to go up in the atmosphere, and it comes out as methane. And so that's the fancy word, but you can tell your friends the other word as well.
Okay, let's take one more from the webpage here, and then we'll kick things over to our special guest on camera. Vivian in Maine wants to know why, when you burn wood, it releases carbon in the air.
So the answer is that when plants grow, they take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and they use it to build themselves, to grow. And so that carbon dioxide gets stored in their fiber, in their trunk, in their branches, and they produce oxygen. But that carbon dioxide that they're drawing out of the atmosphere stays in the plant and in the tree. And so that when you burn it, that tree is no longer there and everything gets released into the atmosphere. And so you may have dust and dirt, but that carbon goes out as a gas, as carbon dioxide, and it gets released into the atmosphere. Great question.
Okay, let's go to our groups on camera here. Mina, if you're ready, go ahead, unmute your microphone and ask your first question to Daniel here.
What parts of the world will suffer the most from climate change?
Oh, thanks, Mina. That is a fantastic question. What we've found is that there's sort of two answers to that. One is that one quick science one is that when we talk about the global warming and the temperatures rising, it doesn't rise evenly across the planet. What we found is that there's higher temperature rise at the poles because of the way the atmosphere works, and it traps in more heat, and less so at the equator. So when we see the effects, the physical effects on the physical environment, there's more going on at the poles than elsewhere. But the people who are most affected by climate change are those who are most vulnerable. And what this means is people in poor countries, people who rely on in what we call environmental services, farming, fishing, most closely, people who don't have the ability to adapt. So one of the things that we can do in places where the United States is, if we have a heat wave, a lot of us are able to turn on an air conditioner, or a lot of us are able to find ways to keep cool. If we don't have that resources, and we're from a very poor part of the world, when we have a heat wave, we're going to suffer a lot because we don't have that option. And so climate change really disproportionately or more affects the vulnerable and the poor than the wealthy. And it's a really good question, because it's a really important part of understanding how we work with people all over the world to adapt to climate change. So we talked a lot, Mina, today about how do we prevent it? How do we slow it? How do we beat it? But we're seeing those effects, right? We talked about those effects, and they're going on right now. So we also have this whole other side of the equation, which is how do we adapt to it? How do we protect the environment? How do we protect our communities? And how do we help those that are most vulnerable and exposed? It's a really good question.
That was a good question. Okay, next up is Mrs. B's class. If you're ready, go ahead, unmute your microphone.
Why has there not been greater development of U.S. geothermal capacity?
Great question. So geothermal is a really interesting one. Unlike, we talked a little bit about energy storage, right? So with wind and with the sun, it's called intermittent, which is a fancy word, what we talked about, meaning it's not always there. At night, the sun's not out and the wind's not blowing. Well, geothermal, when it's working, in general, if you have it, it's there all the time. So it can provide 24-hour energy. So that's really important. The problem is it can be very expensive to develop because it's a little risky. And what I mean is, when they do geological surveys, and we're getting much, much better at this, so the risk should be going down and we should see more of it. But in places where we know we have, that we can go down into the earth and find those pockets of hot air or hot water or that big rock down there, it costs about $5 million to drill down there. And if we miss, you're not getting that money back. Somebody just lost $5 million. And so what we need is to figure out how to get more and more good information about what's really down 2 miles down. And if we can drill down and miss less, then we'll be in better shape. Like in the Southwest US, where there's more of that underneath the surface, then more of that heat that we can tap into, then they're more likely to drill, and you see it there a lot. Another place is in Iceland. There's a lot of geologic activity 1 mile and 2 miles deep. So like Iceland uses geothermal energy for like their whole electricity, because they knew they could drill and they probably wouldn't miss. And so they kept hitting and it kept being cost effective. One place where they're really trying to develop this is in Kenya and Ethiopia, in what's called the Great Rift Valley. And so that's an area where there's a lot of geological activity underneath the ground, and they're trying to figure out how they can get better and better at making sure they hit those hot spots.
That was another really good question.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to bounce over to our Google form here and ask a few more that were submitted from the webpage, and then we'll come back to you guys on camera. We have a good question here from Riel. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, in California, that wants to know, are rechargeable batteries considered renewable energy?
That's a good question. I don't know. I haven't really heard them talked about in that way. It's probably more what we think about when we think about the batteries is trying to get batteries that are as efficient as possible. And what I mean by that is my old laptop, I used to have to charge like every hour. And so I would use an amount of electricity, that's the amount needed to charge the battery, and I'd get an hour out of computer for it. And then I'd have to go back and get more electricity to charge the battery, and I'd get another hour. Now my laptop can go all day. So I take the same amount of electricity, the battery is much more efficient, and I get a full day of laptoping out of that. So that's really what we're trying to focus on, is how do we get batteries that are more and more efficient and can carry a charge longer, so that we have to go back to the electricity less.
Okay, our next question here from Keegan in Maine is curious, why do they want to make all cars electric? Because it feels like it would be more money.
Yeah, so great question, Keegan. I think what they want to be able to do is remove carbon that's created through these big systems in society. So we talked about industry, the making of stuff. We need a lot of heat, so we burn a lot of fossil fuels, and we make steel and concrete, we make paper, even medicines, even food and beverage, to make drinks, there's a lot of heat. And so what we're trying to do is just say, can we do that same thing, but without the carbon? With transport, it's the same thing. We have all of these different types of transportation going on. And in order to make those things move, we have to bring in gas and diesel fuel and natural gas in some cases. So can we have a transportation system? Can we still all get around and have cars and buses and planes and things, but remove the carbon from it? And one way that we want to try to do that is to replace the burning of fossil fuels, that combustion engine, with a battery. And then what we can do is we can charge that battery using renewable electricity. So if we then think about that third pillar, which is electricity, as we get more and more renewables onto the grid, then we're charging our vehicles, but we're charging our vehicles with electricity, and that electricity is greener and greener and greener. So eventually you have very high levels of renewables that are making electricity, and very high levels of vehicles that are then charging their batteries off of that green electricity. So you've removed the carbon from transportation. And what will happen with costs is the costs will come down. We've been doing one type of engine, the combustion engine, for a long, long time. So we know how to do it really well, and we can do it quickly, and we can do it efficiently. The batteries are kind of new, and these new types of cars are kind of new, but what you'll see is the costs are coming way, way down, and pretty soon they'll be more efficient and cheaper than traditional engines.
Okay, let's go back to Mina. If you're ready for your second question, go ahead.
How did you choose to focus on animals and climate change?
That's a good question. I don't even know if we have time for the real answer. No, thank you, Mina. That's a great question. When I went to graduate school, so I went to get a master's degree, and I studied international affairs. So how different countries interact with each other, and how different problems or issues that are beyond just one country, how those are dealt with and how they interact. And I was working at the Treasury Department in the U.S., and they focus on the economy and money and things like that. And one of the things that they were starting to look at was the effects of climate change on the economy, and how do we finance and fund and jumpstart things to become greener and cleaner. And so I thought that was a really interesting and important topic. And I was really interested in thinking about, how do I make an impact? What is something that is so important that if you could contribute to helping, you feel really proud of that you were working on it, so that you could get up every day and say, the work that I'm doing is contributing to something that's really big, and I think the way I'm doing it can have a really big impact. And so then after leaving there, I joined WWF, because I think a lot of what we focus on is trying to have a really big impact in our physical world. And one of those things is on climate. So that's how I chose it. And then if you think about climate, right, we focused on the energy part as being the big thing that we need to fix. And so that's kind of what drew me to the energy piece in specific. I'm not really an engineer. I'm not really too focused on the really technical sides of it, though I think they're really, really cool. But I like the idea is that we can bring people together to try to fix this really big problem.
Okay, Mrs. B's class, you guys look like you're ready for your next question. Go ahead.
What renewable energy source impacts the environment most positively?
That's a good one. Most positively, I think they all do. They all have really positive benefits, particularly related to climate change, particularly related to as a replacement for burning fossil fuels, which create lots of that air pollution that we talked about, which that recent study is really eye-opening. They've used ways of identifying how the air quality in different places all over the world, with much more detail than they've ever been able to do. And what they found when they analyzed that and looked at health outcomes, that the two things were directly connected: how much air pollution there was and what was happening with people's health at a huge scale. And it's really important part of this as well, beyond climate change. But I think each of the technologies, has things that we need to make sure we get right. One of the things is, like, windmills have to be positioned in a certain way so they don't hurt birds or migratory bats. We have to get that right, and we know a lot about how to do that now, and they get better and better every day at doing that. Another one is like solar. Those panels, we have to figure out what to do with them because they have rare earth metals, which are really important things. So we have to figure out how to recycle those, and we have to figure out how when they're done, how to get rid of them in a way that's really clean. And so there's parts of each of those things that's really important to consider, and we're doing, I think, increasingly a really, really good job at that. But generally, they all are extremely positive for the environment compared to the alternative.
There was a question that came through the webpage that's very similar, so I'm going to kind of piggyback off of that here, Daniel. Gregory from Maine wants to know, in your opinion, what is the most efficient form of renewable energy? So I guess kind of related to what you were just talking about, do you feel that there's currently one technology that's a little bit more advanced or up to speed than the others?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see that to this point, particularly in the US, wind has been the most efficient. And really, by most efficient, I mean it was the cheapest to get going and get deployed. So that would be wind. Solar is really catching up. And we've seen a lot of like solar rooftop systems that are getting really, really cheap for people and can really get out onto every house, as well as then going and making bigger solar arrays and solar farms elsewhere. But solar's catching up globally and in the US, but wind right now I think is still the cheapest to install.
Okay, sorry, I was having problems with the
I tricked you up
microphone.
with a short answer for once, Kate.
No. My microphone was not wanting to cooperate here. Another question we got here in the Google form is from Isabel in California that wants to know, what advice would you give to someone who wants to be an environmentalist? So I know you talked briefly about your journey to WWF, but what advice would you give to any young people out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I was someone who was always outdoors as a kid. I did a lot of camping. And so I think, if you're asking the question, what advice would you give to someone who wants to be an environmentalist? You probably already have the first thing you need to do, which is like a love of the environment, a love of nature, and a love of our natural world. And then I think, you could really, this isn't probably an answer that's very satisfying, but you just follow it where you want to go. I mean, if your interest is you want to be out there, with the animals, or if you want to be out there in the forest, that's one thing. If your interests are, you like money and economics, then you can still be an environmentalist by figuring out how to use money and economics to protect our environment. What we hope and what I hope is that, all of us are environmentalists in everything we do. We can't afford to not have that perspective in anything we do in life. We rely so much on the natural world, and what we do in almost every way has some impact or some effect. So being aware of that, I think, and being a steward of the planet is really important for all of us. So I think in a little way, we all have to be environmentalists, but more specifically, I think, what are some of the other things you want? And what does that mean to you? And what are the types of things you enjoy doing? And pursue those, and you can find something where they cross down the road. And also get really, really good grades. That's the obligatory, but it's true.
I think we have time to hear from our camera spots one more time. So Mina, do you have a last question? Okay, go ahead.
Are there any more new ways to make clean electricity other than the ones you mentioned?
Yeah, there's some pretty promising ones that look at it's almost like, think of a windmill spins, right? When the wind blows it. Some people are looking at, waves crashing on the shore constantly, every day, all day. Can we transfer that energy into something that then creates a motor, creates an engine? Another one is similar but different, is think of the tides, those much bigger shifts. That's a huge amount of energy in order to literally move the ocean like 20 feet in 8 hours, then move the ocean back. So how do we can we tap into that? That's always going, it's not going to go away. So that's called tidal energy. And there's a lot of work that's going into that as well. So I think those are two promising examples.
And potentially jobs for this next generation coming up.
Absolutely right.
Okay, Mrs. B's class, go ahead.
Why did the windmills in Texas freeze, but the ones in Illinois didn't?
Right? Great question. They didn't put the right lubricant in because they didn't anticipate that it would be cold. So, I was earlier this year, I was in sort of Northeast Michigan, and it's right on Lake Huron. And in the winter, it's like 30 below, and the whole thing is windmills. And I said, when the Texas thing happened, I said, wait, don't the windmills in Michigan go all year round? I said, yeah, of course they do. And what it was is you have to, they're mechanical systems, and just like your car, right? And particularly old-fashioned, you might not even realize this, but your parents' car has a thing called antifreeze in it. And it was really important in older cars. And we have some other technologies now that prevent it. But if you put the wrong type in and it got really cold, that stuff would freeze up. If you put the right lubricant, the right antifreeze in, then it would be no problem. It would keep going. So it was a question of the motors and not anticipating the cold weather, and therefore not having taken the appropriate precautions to winterize or prepare for winter. Yeah, great question.
That was a really good question. We are almost out of time today, so
we're just getting started.
I know we could keep going all day here. So I just want to give a huge thanks to those of you that watched and submitted questions on the webpage. I also want to thank our special guests we had on camera. You guys did a great job and had really good questions. And obviously a huge thanks to Daniel for spending time with us and teaching us all about renewable energy. Before we go, I just want to share a little bit of information with everyone of educational resources for teachers and parents to potentially use. Don't forget, Earth Hour is this Saturday. Daniel mentioned it in his presentation. So if you're able to participate in that, that would be really great. And you can find this information on the Wild Classroom webpage under Conservation in the Classroom. There's a Kahoot trivia quiz that goes along with Daniel's presentation that has a unique game pin that you can enter. That code is also on the website. So if you missed writing it down here, you can always head over to the webpage and find it. Also, there's several different resources about renewable energy in our Polar Bear Toolkit, as well as a solar energy quiz and green tips suggestions that you can do at home. If you have last questions that we did not have time for today, you can always email them to the Wild Classroom inbox at wildclassroom@wwf-us.org, and we'd be happy to pass those along to Daniel and get some answers back to you. And last but not least, go ahead and mark your calendars for our next event coming up on April 7th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be joined by Dr. Allard Blum, who is the Managing Director for the Congo here at WWF, and he's going to be talking all about the gorillas of the Zanga Zanga. So last but not least, again, thank you all for joining our two groups on camera. If you want to go ahead, unmute yourself and say bye. And we will see you all next time.
Thanks, everybody. That was fun. I think we need Mina to send her resume over.